without further ado, I'd like to call up some of the panelists we'll be hearing from tonight. Could I have Sharon, Taz, Yaritza, and Aiha come to the stage, please? Oh, and Fermin is here. Fermin, I'm going to sneak you in as well. Can you please grab a chair and come to the stage, and we'll squeeze you in. A few preliminary things about tonight's forum. We don't want to engage in a theoretical argument about what the Constitution says or doesn't say. Currently, we are in a very special situation in which our Supreme Court is divided 4-4. There is an appointment, theoretically, of another Supreme Court justice in the way, not the one that was picked by the outgoing president a year before his term ended, but apparently, again, so some sort of sleight of hand that happens in the federal government. We are in this position we're in now, which leads us to believe that we might need to be prepared to actually organize to defend civil rights, civil liberties, and fight for equity and equality in a space in which the White House, the Congress, and the Supreme Court could be hostile to everyone's interests, or at least some people's interests. So what are you going to do in that scenario? Well, you get together the people that know how to fight back when your back is against the wall and to create space when no space exists. I'd like to introduce Tanzila Ahmed, who is famous. It's not an understatement to say that. She was recognized by Oprah Winfrey in O Magazine. She is a co-host of a great podcast called Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. She is the political director for 18 Million Rising. She's pages and pages of Google search results. So a round of applause for Tanzila, please. To the left of Taz is Aiha Nguyen, who works for the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy. She is our expert on labor, on research, on intersectionality in a space in which we are now making a shift from a narrow conversation about what happens in one specific hotel or one specific fast food restaurant, and now into a bigger shift of economic renewal. We couldn't have a conversation without having somebody who really understands the fundamentals of how structures and systems change and work and function together, and how coalitions are built across organizations. So thank you, Aiha, for being here. Round of applause. Next is Yaritza Gonzalez. Yaritza is a student organizer who is now a post-student organizer. She's now a paralegal at Carecen. During her time as a student, she served the White House Initiative for Excellence for Hispanic Americans. She served CHIRLA. She served a number of organizations, again, in a capacity as a student organizing in undocumented and other spaces in which advocacy was being won by folks that, according to some, don't have agency because of their age, because of their citizenship status, and so forth. So again, if we're going to talk about organizing in spaces and how we're going to expand our understanding of civil rights and civil liberties and use these spaces for leverage, we need to have someone like Yaritza on our panel. So please give her a round of applause. Next is Sharon, who again should be doing this job instead of me, but we have to hear from her and not have her host, so it's one of those very awkward things. It's like, I'm trying to think of the appropriate pop culture metaphor here. It's like putting Obi-Wan Kenobi on the panel when Luke Skywalker is still at the beginning of his training. I don't know, is that too geeky? I don't know, probably. Sharon is a powerful advocate, not only in her position as a teacher, as a professor of law, but also as obviously a longstanding member of the ACLU of Southern California. She is the representative of our affiliate chapter to the national board of the ACLU, and these are the boards that decide the policy of the ACLU. So if the ACLU is going to take a position on Citizens United, if they're going to take a position on the Second Amendment, if they're going to take a position on anything that is of import and consequence, they're going to go through Sharon, and Sharon's going to make sure they do it right. But I want to say one other thing about Sharon, and I think it's, again, very interesting that everyone on this panel comes to this panel with a personal story and a personal experience that's very special. And I think that the idea that her interest in the law and her interest in civil liberties began because of fighting injustice and incarceration in her own family, I think that makes it a special bonus that she has both experiential and academic learning to share with us tonight. So an applause for Sharon. And last, Fermin, who I didn't just add on because I needed another boy, although it's very obvious that it kind of works that way. He, again, is someone who came up in undocumented student organizing, as somebody who came here at the age of 11, without papers. But beyond that, he's an expert in digital space organizing, which I think is a very interesting question. In movements around the world, whether we go back to the Green Revolution in Iran, or we're talking about what happened during Arab Spring, we've always had a conversation about technology and how technology is part of our new way of spreading information, of organizing movements. And on the counter side, we've always heard how police are now using special towers to shut down social media, to squash Twitter. Now we're talking about, because of this Dakota Access Pipeline movements, using end-to-end encryption and communicating between folks, using Facebook check-in to try to divert police from focusing on people that are checking into places and targeting them for arrest. So you really need to have somebody who understands the lay of the land when it comes to digital organizing, and Fredemina is the best. So please give him a round of applause. So before I ask the panelists a question, I would like to ask the audience a question, which is, what is your definition of civil liberties? Please raise your hand if someone has a definition. Nobody has a definition? Somebody want to take it like a wild guess? Yes, sir. Sorry.
An attempt to define them was the Bill of Rights, saying, you know, you have the right to assemble, you have the right to free press, and so on. I mean, so it's an example, or at least somebody's attempting a definition.
Okay. Do folks accept that definition of civil liberties as being what is canonized in the Bill of Rights, or do folks think that it's wider than that? Chris?
I would just say, I think it's giving rights to individuals from overweening government. That's what I understand the Bill of Rights was constructed.
Okay. So we're still focusing on negative rights, preventing the government from taking action against people. Does anyone have an alternate definition or expanded definition?
Well, yeah, I guess, I mean, in amplification of what she said, I believe it was an attempt to prevent a majority from overriding the rights of individuals in a democracy.
Okay. So minority rights within civil liberties. So let's follow this with a sort of follow-up question. So there was a time in which citizens of the United States were only white persons, white males of the United States, right? Does anyone know of an example of a time in which somebody tried to create a space for civil rights through the courts in the early 20th century? Everybody knows the answer, but you want to say it. So there's a case the gentleman whose name I always mispronounce, but I think it's Bong Sin-Thin, in 1923, was arguing that on the basis of the eugenics at the time, the science at the time that showed that he was a pure-blooded Caucasian as a South Asian, he was trying to prove that he was white and therefore entitled to all of the rights of citizens protected by the Naturalization Act of 1906. He went all the way to the Supreme Court, and in a unanimous decision, he lost. This is sort of like a lesser famous version of the Dred Scott decision, in which somebody is trying to create a space through the courts, and yet they are unsuccessful because the courts are hostile at the time. And I say this not to be a Debbie Downer, but again to remind us that we're in a situation in which the path to which we affirm liberty is not necessarily because we've won a piece of legislation or a court decision, but because we're organizing in new and creative ways. So that takes us to our first question for our panel. What can we learn from the organizing that we've seen in undocumented spaces, by persons in detention and in prison organizing hunger strikes, by folks who, in Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives, who have proven to us that the rights of citizenship do not necessarily mean accountability and justice? So that's my very easy first question. Yaditza?
Well, again, thank you for allowing me to be in this space. I am a recent grad, and I think that my understanding of civil liberties and the reason why we should challenge anything that contests our civil liberties is because, if not, we wouldn't see any progress. Within my time at Dartmouth College, I was in a space that was very different from where I grew up, and I think that it was a constant battle of having to contest a lot of the norms there, especially being a person that was undocumented. I myself am not undocumented, but my friends and other students in my class were, and I became a very huge part of that movement while I was there. And I guess seeing that as a microcosm of the larger world and the history of this country, I realized that if we don't challenge, then we don't see any progress. Because of the things that we did while I was there during my 4 years there, we were able to now get more policies changed in terms of like having financial aid for undocumented students and things in that sort. So I think that as a small microcosm of the larger world, I think I've seen it in that capacity. And now working for Caresen, which is an immigrant rights organization, and seeing the work that they've been doing and challenging all the orders that have been sent out recently by the new president, I've seen that it's really important to be able to speak up and say that something is wrong, right? And I think that the panelists here have a lot more experience in like seeing that work done. I'm barely starting in my life in terms of like being more active in the community. I mean, as a high school student I was too, but seeing it now more in action and during this point in history.
Can you talk a little bit about the Library of Congress campaign?
Yeah, so also while I was at Dartmouth College, I wasn't the person that started the initiative, but I was a part of the organization that led it after. A student named Melissa Padilla, who is now graduated from Dartmouth College this year, she started researching for a class and came across the word illegal in a lot of the search catalogs. And for her, as someone who was undocumented and had been a part of the activist movement, to drop the I word throughout the country, right? It's a national movement that was happening a while back. And her noticing that it was in this institution that's supposed to create leaders, right, of the world, it's the Ivy League or whatever, realizing that it was allowed in that space and being used over and over in different research papers, and the professors validating it by allowing it, and dehumanizing people, right, of this country by using that word. She took it upon herself to contact the librarians there and talk to them about potentially changing that word or not allowing it in the search catalog. And the librarians were all for it. They're like, oh my God, like, we've never thought about that, and I think that's amazing that you're starting this initiative. So long story short, they were able to pass a petition to get rid of it in the Library of Congress. The status of it is still underway. They've said that yes, we're going to change it. That was in May of 2016. It was approved, and I think congressmen have been fighting for it continuously, like Joaquin Castro. And yeah, I don't know. It's just, but seeing how like one person can make a huge change, right, in an institution, and not only there, but in the nation. It's like, I don't know. It's incredible to see people like that do things like that. So I'm very grateful to have been a part of that organization and know people like Melissa Padilla.
I wanted to talk a little bit about civil rights and civil liberties, because I for one, didn't even know the difference between civil rights and civil liberties until relatively recently, actually until I went to law school. So civil liberties are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is typically captures what our civil liberties are. And they are those liberties that the United States government, or any state actor for that matter, has to be constrained against violating those rights. So it's like you characterized it, it's a negative action. These are things that the United States cannot infringe upon, these rights. Civil rights, on the other hand, now I make a distinction between civil rights and civil liberties. Civil rights are captured in the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment, civil rights talk about equal protection, and it lists protected classes of people who the government has an obligation to protect, because historically these classes of people have been discriminated against. And so, unlike the civil liberties, where the government is constrained, with civil rights, the government must take action and protect certain classes of people. And the reason it's so important for us to understand the difference and understand our power in this is because, like, take me for example, many of my ancestors were not protected by any of that stuff. I mean, when the first 10 amendments were written to the Constitution, I have ancestors that were sitting locked up in chains. So it took an organized effort and literally hundreds of years to make that change and for us to get to the place where we were a protected class under the 14th Amendment. And that's why it's so important to keep fighting, even when it may appear the precedent is against you, the legislature is against you, the Supreme Court, Plessy v. Ferguson, is against you. It doesn't matter that they're against you. What is really important and what's so fantastic is the power of the people is more powerful than all that stuff.
Can I ask you to talk then a little bit about, since you've kind of opened us in this direction, so we could have a very strict academic conversation, right, about civil rights and civil liberties and the distinctions on paper, but the functionality of it, right, the way it actually operates in the real world, is that you need to make it whole, right? It's like whole person care, right? If I go to the doctor and I complain about something and give me a medicine, but that's really not going to fix me if there's something wrong systemically, endemically, right? And so civil liberties and the fights for civil liberties and the fights for civil rights are revealing something to us, as you were alluding to, about the systems and what they're lacking. And I would be very curious to hear, as somebody who's become such an expert in mass incarceration, about some of the things that you think we can learn about the challenges currently underway to the systems, the judicial system, and so forth.
We can learn is that the Constitution is not self-enforcing. So it's a wonderful thing to have this Bill of Rights and to have the 14th Amendment. But when it all comes down to it, it's just a piece of paper. And without people, you know, it's fantastic that we have this skeletal structure to kind of take a stand, and we can hold up this document and say, in accordance with the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or the 14th Amendment, I stand on that and I make a claim. But I still have to make a claim. I still have to align myself with experts. I still have to educate myself. I still have to organize. And this is a responsibility that everyone living in this country who hopes to live a whole life, in order for you to do that, you really have to work at it. The Constitution itself will not, the Constitution alone will not protect you. It takes work along with the Constitution.
So, yeah, I'm learning a lot right now, too. So, you know, I just want to bring it back to, I want to begin by kind of just reflecting on the moment that we're in. And, you know, recently when I hear our president, even during the campaign, right, talk about immigrants and unaccompanied minors became this big buzzword, right, used in the media. And, you know, I kind of reflected back on my own life, and I saw myself in a lot of those kids that were coming over here, because I did that about, you know, more than 15 years ago, right? And so, you know, when I hear those words, they're not just words to me, they're personal. And I, you know, one of the things that I've been doing, I got involved in high school and, you know, began to, because I was undocumented, I didn't have papers, I couldn't go to college at that time. Without financial aid, wasn't eligible for a lot of scholarships. And so, you know, I began to organize with other young people. And what I learned is that we all have a story, right? And we all have a powerful story that we need to share. And I think, you know, part of challenging the notions and the system, it's about sharing our own story. And knowing that other people relate to stories, right? So that's part of what I think needs to happen. You know, I follow a page on social media called Humans of New York, right? Anybody follows that page? And it's a photographer, right? All he does is tell stories of people, moments in their life, and captures them. And actually, you know, it's one of the highest performing pages on Facebook. And that's because people are interested in that.
Can you repeat the name? I guess I'm not.
Oh, Humans of New York. That's the page if you go on Facebook. And I think, you know, part of the work that I'm doing I work for SAU Local 2015. We're the biggest union in the state. And we organize caregivers, and part of the work that we're doing is really focusing on their stories, right? These are not just people who make low wages. They have families, they have children, they sacrifice the entire life. Sometimes they put their career on hold. You know, we're not talking about just older people, it's younger people as well. And so I think, you know, part of the fight, it's really about like capturing those stories, telling those stories. And I've been pretty inspired by all the work that has been going on lately. You know, there's like Facebook groups like popping up like everywhere, right, of people sharing their own stories, and people talking about, not just about from a policy perspective, but from a personal point of view, and that to me has been very powerful. On Twitter, if folks are on Twitter, almost every day now there's a conversation about a different topic, a different issue. And so I want to challenge folks here to be part of those conversations and join them, because there's a lot of people out there that, you know, don't go to a rally, they don't, right, come to a forum. They're not going to call their congresspeople, but they might be on Twitter, you know, talking about The Bachelor, and they might, like, you know, see something, right, like that's trending, and they might want to join the conversation. They might see an episode of Blackish or something, right, that may trigger them, or Trump said something, and they might go online to see what's going on, what are people talking about. And then that's why it's, you know, I feel it's also part of our responsibility as activists to really join those conversations and you know, hopefully put our own spin into it and educate people. There's a lot of folks that just, you know, there are a lot of trolls as well online, right? But there's also a lot of people that are just going there to learn, especially now. It might be like their first, I feel like this moment is politicizing a lot of people, and they might be going to, they're not watching CNN and MSNBC. They're like on Twitter, you know, they're on Facebook, they're on Snapchat, they're on Instagram. And if we can create content and stories that can inspire them to be the change that they want to see, I think that's really important, and that's how I got involved, and I've been inspired by sort of those stories and movements that they keep me going.
And I liked what you said about Bhagat Singh Thind, who was a Sikh man. He was a South Asian man, so I use him in a lot of my workshops. And one of the things that I keep thinking back to is that laws are relative. You know, when you look at the Voting Rights Act when you look at voting rights and who has had the right to vote, that has changed constantly over the years. The first people who had the right to vote were white men who were property owners, and that's been shifting. South Asian, my family's from Bangladesh, we didn't have the right to vote. We didn't have the right to vote until 1947. So it took a while for those rights to happen. And the other thing that I want to highlight is that the importance of us not to forget, because we're in a time where people somehow forgot that they watched Schoolhouse Rock when they were growing up, and they forgot how the laws are being made, and then now we're in this kind of government stage where people are like, well, yeah, maybe that's okay, right? So we need to go back to basic civics education. I mean, really our president needs a basic civics education, and everyone else is kind of like taking advantage of that at this moment. We need to remember, we need to not forget, basically. We need to not forget that this is the legacy that we are built upon, and that it's really easy and quick for our rights to be taken away, and we need to remember how we got here so that it doesn't happen again.
You're one of the few people that's doing the storytelling and the organizing, right, in lots of different places as an artist and as a writer. And I want to talk about then, you know, the real sort of dark question, which is, you know, how do we win in a situation where the White House is against us, the Congress is against us, the Supreme Court is against us? And I think it's interesting that you talked about voting, because like one of the questions I've always had is, if we really do have a right to vote, because there's all these amendments to this Constitution around voting, like the 15th Amendment, the 21st Amendment, the 19th Amendment rather, but every state has the power to regulate voting, and so voting looks different in every state. So you have the right to do something, but it doesn't actually materialize as the same equal right in every place, which means that everybody's fighting locally to like really define what that right is. And I'd really love to hear from you about, you know, how are you going to win? I mean, you're a woman, you're Muslim, brown,
I
got a
don't
lot of
know.
strikes against you.
There are a lot of strikes against me. I don't know how I'm going to win. I think that's a really tough question. I do think, I think just, I've been working in the world of voting for 15 years now, just seeing how it's moved over the years and seeing how things have been falling apart over the years has been really interesting. Particularly, the most recent case being the fact that the White House said that there was, something like 2 million fake voters in California?
3 to 5 million
3 to 5
across the country.
with no proof, right? So the facts are being distorted now, and I think that is a problem. A big part of what we do at 18 Million Rising is the work of counter narratives and culture shifting. And by counter narratives, we mean that we think it's important for communities of color, communities on the margins, to tell their own narratives so that they have their own power. And within that, there's also a bit of history, remembering your legacy of where you came from so that when you move forward in doing your work, you're not starting afresh. And then the culture shifting component is kind of like it's changing how many, we're an Asian American organization, so it's kind of changing how many Asian American faces you see in pop culture, or how we are battling to make sure that alt-right isn't a term that's used now. And that's a petition that we have out. And so it goes from the range, right? So how do we change culture to give us power back? I think the hard thing right now for me personally is just, it feels like a lot of the culture shifting work we did to get here is kind of unraveled really quick. I just didn't think Nazis would be in the news. And it's just really surprising for me to think that, like, okay, like, we did a lot of work to get this to this point where we know that Nazis are bad, and now all of a sudden we have to talk about this again. So it's a bit of a struggle right now to figure out how do we move away from the traditional tactics we've been building up for all these many, many years. Now all of a sudden we're like, okay, we need to go back to the 1940s and use those tactics again. That was a little rambly, sorry.
No, that was great. Why is that important? The actual language itself.
Right. So I think campaigns like Drop the I Word are super important because it ties into like what I said about dehumanizing, but also storytelling. So a human being, without criminalizing, without even thinking about like why it is that they left their country to come here, and why it is that they probably didn't do it the right way or like the legal way, right? It completely takes away from that whole story by calling someone illegal and not allowing them to really tell you why they did. Not that they need a reason to, but because. But yeah, I think it completely takes away from their whole story and what they do on the day-to-day to try to survive in this country. And just not using the word illegal would allow for that to be more open.
How do we categorize information, right? And then right before that campaign, there was a campaign targeting the Associated Press and the New York Times. Jose Antonio Vargas, who's probably one of the most famous undocumented folks in the country, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, was one of the people who helped sort of, was the face of that campaign in many ways, right? Because he was really writing direct op-eds and talking about this. And it's interesting because, again, like, you're working in advocacy spaces. You worked for the White House, for educational excellence. What does it mean? What does it mean in newspaper spaces to see, more precise language versus dehumanizing language? What is the effect that you've seen, that you've witnessed with these victories?
Right. Well, words matter, and I think that in policy, where those are the laws that are kind of ruling the way that the country sees it's a tough question. I guess, having the privilege to work in those spaces that I have and realizing the language that's being used there, right? Like sometimes it's very different from like how I grew up, and realizing that those people that are in power, that are creating these policies and using certain words, that really does have an effect on how maybe professors are going to teach their classes and talk about certain things that are then going to affect the students that are going to be going out into the world, right, and talking about these issues and using those languages like illegal. I think that's super important to then like influence those policymakers to change the language so that the people in the day-to-day, right, that my mom and dad, like people are going to see them and not think that they're illegal, but that they're people and that they're working really hard to try to make it in this country. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it gets at that it's important that words matter, and that if people have the power to change how the narrative from these people are being told, then words like illegal should not exist in the day-to-day, or like should not be used to identify a person.
So shortly after Trump was elected, I was asked to participate in an online training series, and I did a 90-minute session on dog whistling in everyday life. And dog whistling, for those of you who are unfamiliar with that term, it's a term that was pretty much coined to characterize what the right does when they want to use racist language, but because it's no longer socially acceptable to do so, they cloak their language, and they may talk about welfare queens, and everyone knows the image that pops up in the minds of people when they talk about welfare queens. And so this type of dog whistling language, I would even put the I word in that same category, because the purpose of doing that is to establish a hierarchy of humans, and which humans are deserving of respect and which humans are not deserving of respect, without actually coming out and saying it. And the end result is that it has a subliminal effect on people. People receive messages subliminally that tell them, well, these kind of people over here just are not deserving of respect. They're not deserving of social services. They're not, I mean, it impacts policy. It impacts who we elect into office. And so that's why it's really important to be very specific about the language that we use. And needless to say, this I word business is inaccurate, just like black on black crime. That's something that in the United Kingdom, they have chosen to ban that term. They're not using that term anymore because it has the same impact, and it is also inaccurate.
Now we're talking about dignity and humanity,
Yes.
right? And then, there is no moment at which civil liberties, civil rights, humanity, and dignity evaporate, right? There are conditions on things. We talked about voting rights. There are conditions on voting rights. But no one has ever said, free from a clear and present danger, for instance, for the freedom of speech, that you are supposed to be robbed of your freedom of speech, right? And so I'm curious about this notion of folks who are incarcerated, who are coming out of incarceration as felons, who are fighting, very practical campaigns like the Check the Box campaign, right? We're talking about, in my mind, these are extensions of those civil liberties, of those civil rights, because you're talking about the dignity and the humanity and reaffirming the ability to avoid some sort of punitive thing from haunting you for life. Could you talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done in those spaces?
The Check the Box campaign, actually, Dick and I, my husband's back there, we worked as part of the LA Progressive, the ACLU, a coalition of organizations to get the city of Los Angeles, and this was a successful campaign, and we really tried to honor our victories because there aren't a whole lot of them. But it's really important that you hold them up high because it kind of gives you the energy to keep fighting. And the Check the Box was on employment applications at the bottom for municipal jobs, so any jobs in the city of Los Angeles. There used to be a box at the bottom of the employment application that asked you, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Now that box has been removed. Now, a person's, they could still have a background check, and in many instances they will still have a background check, but at least by removing the box, it gives someone an opportunity to get further along in the process of gaining employment. So that's one of the battles, but there are many, and this is our job as a civil society. I think we kind of tend to think, you get the Constitution, you get that in place, okay, that job is done, but that ain't how it works. And that's why the ACLU is one of the premier organizations that works to fight to support our civil liberties and our civil rights. And I just, if it's okay, if I could just kind of toot the horn of the ACLU right now. Right now, more than ever, we really need volunteers and we need donations for the ACLU, because while the ACLU has gotten a huge boatload of money that has come in since November the 8th, it's still not enough to mount a real campaign to fight some of these things that Trump is promising to do. Just today, he put out a memo where he's talking about changing our immigration policy. And I was listening to Larry Mantle on NPR, and Ahilan, who is the lead attorney at the ACLU, was being interviewed. And Ahilan was asked if he thought that the new policies were something that the ACLU could challenge at the constitutional level. And he said that he thought so. He thought that he could see some due process violations and some equal protection violations. But even though these things can be challenged, many, hundreds, thousands of people can still be harmed psychologically, emotionally, and who knows how many other ways. The ACLU has 300 attorneys employed nationwide. And while that may sound like a lot of attorneys, the Department of Justice and various other governmental agencies have 17,000, hear me, 17,000 attorneys. And who is at the helm? We know who's at the helm, right? So we are really in a state of crisis. It is time for us. Everybody here, I'm so happy you're here. Tell your friends. Partner with organizations like the ACLU and other organizations. This is not a time to be asleep.
It started a long time ago. Lane worked on the first minimum wage in 1997. It was a very long time. It took us a long time to get here, but in the process we were building power. We were building relationships. We were doing a lot of this cultural shift that was really necessary about the fact that if you work a full-time job, you should be able to survive on it. Nobody can argue with that. I think what people get trapped into is thinking that I deserve it, but you don't. Well, if everybody can be lifted at the same time, lifting all boats, that message works. So, if we talk about how we can change the country, I think we need to go back to talking about the real issues that Americans really care about. I don't think, and we see Trump's popularity falling, so we know that they're not going to keep listening to him. Well, I keep hearing about regret, so I think that's a space to do that. In terms of California, we've had a bunch of conversations with other states and other organizations, and it's good and bad, but a big chunk of the rest of the country is looking at what California is going to do. And I think we're up for the challenge. We've seen it in Los Angeles with the city council passing or decriminalizing street vending in order to protect a lot of undocumented workers. We see that Senator Lara is introduced single payer to provide health insurance in the event that ACA is actually repealed. And I don't trust that the Republicans actually have a good plan afterwards. So, California is really standing up. We are recognizing that we have our own power, and we're going to keep pushing that envelope. And I think other states are going to try to do that. On the individual level, within unions, a lot of them are kind of all over the place. It's not unified. And there's some that are seeing that they have to push back against Trump, and others that are kind of saying this is the only way we can do anything is to be on his side. So there's still a huge discussion, and I don't think I can say that there is one unified labor movement, but the ones that are progressive and really seeing that they need to protect as many people as possible, they're looking at their own membership and realizing some of those members in those red states probably voted for Trump. And they're having those conversations with those members and saying, why did you do that? How do we figure this out? Why would you vote against your own self-interest, against your own coworkers? And building solidarity is incredibly important, especially in states where raids are happening. We need workers to stand together, So I don't know the answer to how we win. I think we're trying as many things as possible, and for myself, I came to the United States. I'm not exactly sure if I was a refugee or not, but I was in a refugee camp. So, I think the answer is yes. And it's not a great place to be. And there I met people who'd been there for 2 or 3 years. And ultimately, 10 years later, they were sent back to their country, their life on hold. And I talked to some conservative Vietnamese who were like, well, we got in, but we can't keep letting people in. And I have to remind them that, the president and Congress pushed back through the refugee resettlement bill, even when the nation was 32%, only 32% of people supported it. So if they believed that they were lucky or that somehow God was on their side, it was because people like us stood up and said it was necessary to do that and took leadership. So I think leadership is going to be another big thing we're going to have to think about in the Democratic Party, in the labor movement, in this room.
Ricardo Lara, Kevin De Leon, Anthony Rendon, whoever the next governor will be, there are those kinds of leaders. But then there are leaders on the ground, right? And you were involved with the UCLA Labor Center, you were involved in undocumented, activists before you came into labor, and then you adopted to digital, I think in part because you figured out that you could outsmart people in terms of organizing, and you could find those specific audiences. So can you talk to me a little about what's happening right now in terms of the digital terrain? There's a lot of talk about immigration raids and apps to be developed to get in front of those immigration raids. And what are ways in which we can use technology now to again win in this world that Sharon very accurately predicted and described as a very precarious place.
Yeah, I think to your question, I wanted to take a very practical approach. So I actually wrote some websites down that I wanted to share with folks that you can go actually right now and take action. I'll start off with, there's a few. One is Swing Left. I don't know if folks have heard about that. But Swing Left is basically a really great tool, organizing tool that folks are using. Basically what it is, you put your zip code, whatever zip code you live in, and then it tells you the first contested race, congressional race that's close to you. And there's several things you can do. One of the things is donate to a campaign or make some calls. So if, talking about campaigns, one of the things that the Bernie Sanders campaign did really well is utilize this app called Hustle. And I never realized it until we started using it at the union now. But basically it's people who are texting you from other places, other states, and trying to get you to come out to a local event in your community. So they would say, hey, this is Fermin, this is going on in your community, can you come out? And that's how a lot of, they had thousands and thousands of people at their rallies, right? So Hustle is an app, and then Swing Left is a website. Another one is invisibleguy.org. That's what I think somebody else mentioned it here. And that website, actually one of my coworkers this morning went to a meeting, and they actually went to Representative Lowenthal's office in Long Beach, and they got him to commit to do a town hall in Long Beach in the community. And before this, he wasn't budging. Like he didn't want to, come out publicly and engage the community. But there was a delegation that went this morning and got him to commit. And so this website is bringing a lot of heat to a lot of politicians, both on the left and the right. And so it's, you've seen the news of people taking over some of the congressional offices and town halls. So this is a really great tool. And then another one that I found that I've been looking at, it's called resistancemanual.org. And that's a really powerful tool as well. What it does is it's kind of like Wikipedia. So you go on the site and then you basically get to choose the campaign that you want to work on. So you pick an issue, whether it's criminal justice, education reform, immigration, the economy, any issue that matters to you, you click on it, and then it gives you some action steps on what you can do. And so, some of the sites are really gaining a lot of traction online, and they're getting featured in the news. So I just wanted to provide you with that. So, and then one other number that we've been using to fight against, to get people in Congress to commit to protect the ACA is this number 844-6-RESIST. Again, 844-6-RESIST. And what you do is just call that number, and then they transfer you to your local representative, and you can ask them to commit to protect the ACA and the 20 million Americans who benefit from it. And you know, one other thing that I kind of wanted to mention was about Prop 47, because I think that was a really powerful campaign in California. And Prop 47, you know, it was basically, I was working at Community Coalition at the time in South LA, bringing black and brown folks together to really work on criminal justice. And what happened, it was really beautiful because there was a coalition across the state. You know, we were fighting against a lot of the police chiefs who have a lot of power, right? The police union, the guards union, the prison guards union. And I think it passed, and it was a testament to the power of community organizing. There was a lot of, there's a organization, a coalition called California Calls that was really critical in mobilizing, I think they mobilized 1 million voters, and they had like a bunch of different organizations, including the ACLU, be a part of it. Community Coalition, Inner City Struggle, several organizations also in the Bay, and so it was a really powerful thing. And then you had John Legend, who came out and actually did a song and a video, and you had a bunch of artists doing art around Prop 47. You had the California Endowment do the Schools Not Prison campaign. So it was a really, I think, a model to follow, and that I think we have a lot of lessons to learn from, you know, multiple campaigns. I think, you know, we can't get desperate at this point, right? We lost the battle, but I think we still can win the war. And it doesn't end, you know, just by Trump being elected, right? Like, that's just one thing, but I think what you were saying about local communities building local power, it's really how the Tea Party won and they took over Congress. They were just doing a lot of noise on the local level, right? And little by little, nobody knew who they were, but they were very vocal, and then little by little started organizing, gaining more and more momentum and power until they were able to really win. They started with a lot of the local school boards, commissions, a lot of the local governments, and I think you know, so often as on the Democratic side, you tend to focus more on the big campaigns, the national campaigns. Folks, you know, they're more sexy, right? Like, but at the same time, like, there's a lot of commissions. I never, you know, also, I wasn't like, I knew about the Democratic clubs, but until this election, I always thought that those were just like a place, you know, that you just go and not do much, you know, you just talk. And that's why I never joined them, but now I'm realizing there's a lot of folks who were in the Bernie campaign that are running to do delegates. They won a lot of seats, and that's amazing. They're challenging the establishment of the Democratic Party, and I think that's also important, and this moment has really been a wake-up call to a lot of activists to step up our game, you know, and I think that's really it's really helping us to build momentum for what's to come.
The question I want to ask each of the panelists before we turn to audience questions is, so some of you have alluded a little bit to your personal story, which is, I think, part of why you do what you do. But I want to ask you the corollary question of, you know, why you do what you do in the space in which you do it versus a different space. And then what are you hoping you're going to get out of it, 5 years or 10 years or before you die? I don't know how long you want to make that, how grandiose you want to make that goal, but, you know, why are you fighting? How did you choose to fight in the space in which you're fighting, and what are you hoping to achieve?
So I'm fighting the fight that I'm fighting because I learned, I would say relatively late in life. I think I learned relatively late in life that this country does not operate fairly. And when I say late in life, I'm going to say probably I was in my early 30s when I really realized that Doesn't matter how good you are, how smart you are, how you do everything right. If you are a certain type of person, you're just not just going to get a fair deal. Somebody's going to get a better deal. And this whole notion of living in a meritocracy is fantasy. It's not real. It's not true. And so that for me was a really rude awakening because I have children that also look like me. And so what that means is then I pass down in my legacy children that are going to experience some of the same types of discriminatory behaviors that were inflicted upon me. So that made me change, and then you talked briefly about mass incarceration. It's a long story, and I'm not going to take up the other panelists' time, but that became my focus. And I decided to go to law school, went to law school, and then my husband and I created the LA Progressive. And what I'm hoping is that there are a few things that we really can do to make major change. One thing is we need a powerful media. Right now we have corporate media, and corporate media feeds you a line that doesn't really help you. We need to support independent progressive media. And my hope is that the LA Progressive or some other media outlet like it will be the progressive paper of record for Los Angeles. I'd like for that to be sort of my legacy. But aside from that, I also want to be able to train people's lawyers. So I'm a law professor at People's College of Law. So we have to have people's lawyers, not people who go to Georgetown or Harvard. Those are great law schools and everything, but you come out owing so much money that you're almost forced to work for these corporations. You're forced to support these deep-pocketed corporations that harm our environment, that harm us. And then the other thing I want to support and learn from my elders. There are a couple of gentlemen in the audience who are former Black Panthers, who are elders, and they're doing a self-conscious raising film series. They have a flyer in the back. That's going on. And learning from the elders is something that we minimize in this country, which is just so essential.
It's interesting because I've been, in my professional career, I've been doing a lot of like nonprofit, labor, but before, there was a time where I felt kind of burned out a little bit of just, the fight. I was really involved with the immigrant rights movement, and we're doing like a march, we're doing student walkouts, doing like a march every day. We're calling Congress people, we're doing, organizing conferences, everything. And I began to think, well, it's, somebody said you need to go to school and the movement's still going to be there. And I was like, well, I can do both, and so that's why I've, decided to. And then, as like a young person, you kind of think about, well, should I go do some corporate thing, right? Like, especially being Latino and like knowing two languages and learning how like the media market works and how like advertising works. And I was like, it's tempting to go into those spaces. But I decided, no, I'm gonna come back to my community and start reflecting about all the different points in my life that relate to policy. When I had to take the bus to go to school, right, to take the dash to go to high school, we need a better transportation system, than having to walk a mile, right? When I was getting free lunches from school, well, that's important that we protect that program. When I didn't have papers and then became a legal permanent resident, well, that's because somebody else fought for that law, right? So I really began to really think about, when my mom and I we were on food stamps at one point growing up. And then I thought, well, somebody needs to protect that program, right? There's other people who are working actively to dismantle all that. When I go to the doctor, well, somebody fought before so we can have a healthcare system, right? That's not perfect, but that works for a lot of people, especially when you're Medicare and Medi-Cal, right? So, I look at all those points in my life and I can't help but to and to think that, you know, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life, is to fight for these issues, and then build, you know, technology tools and build websites, videos, whatever, tell stories, anything that I can do and use my skills to really advance those causes, I'll do. So that's what I've been doing, is telling people stories. There's a lot of apps now, like on your phone. You know, if you have a smartphone, that's one of the most powerful weapons that you can have to create change. So sometimes, like, I just go on my phone and I take shots of like the marches. I interview somebody and then I just edit it real quick on my phone. There's actually an app called Quick that would do it for you, that does it for you. It's both on the Apple Store and the, I feel like I'm advertising. But it does it for you. It creates a video for you, and then you just add your text, right? And that, people engage with that, right? Like, and then there's, I was gonna pull out my phone and start telling people apps. But you know, it's all those things, right? When you go on Twitter, you can look at on the left hand side, you can see all the trending topics, and you can add your voice to that conversation. So that's what, you know, that's what really motivates me and inspires, that we can change people's hearts and minds through storytelling, through digital organizing, through video production. And I'm blessed to be at a place at the union where we have some resources to really be able to create good content for people. So if you go on our Facebook page, you see SCA Local 2015, you see videos of people who are fighting the good fight. You see photos, you see articles and blogs, and so, you know, that's what I want to continue to do, is just be able to create technology and content that people engage with, and hopefully we can change some minds, you know, and policy as well.
So right now I work as a paralegal at the Central American Resource Center. The reason I do what I do is because I do it for my family, I do it for my community, for the people that I've met throughout my life that have been struggling with trying to find a sort of status of relief here in this country, and outside of that too. I want to continue working in immigrant rights because, like I said, I've just been affected by growing up in Inglewood, California, where it's predominantly Latino and Black, and just seeing how the struggles that people that are undocumented, other different struggles, intersections that follow through with being undocumented and other identities as well. I want to potentially go to law school. I never really thought about going to law school until my last year of college. I came from a low-income school that the only reason why I learned about Dartmouth College was because of a nonprofit that helped me get into an East Coast school through doing like a program. Being there was really hard, for sure, because of my background, because of different reasons. And so leaving the space and finding people, especially from the undocumented community there, really pushed me to want to continue in that path and struggle with the presidency that we have now. I think it's a very interesting time to want to pursue this path, and I think that there's a lot of work to be done. I'm very blessed to be working where I'm at, to be employed as a recent grad, where now people are like struggling to see whether or not they're going to have work permits for people that have DACA, and working for the Central American Resource Center, specifically with the unaccompanied minors program, as well as the people, mostly women that have been victims of domestic violence, so UV Savawa work. That's been very inspiring for me to want to continue doing that kind of work in immigrant laws, or pursuing immigration law. And again, it's very inspiring to be in that space, particularly because there's so many women of color that are attorneys. Growing up, I didn't really see that. And then going to the school that I did, I never really saw too many people, women of color, really going into those, during my years, I didn't really see too many role models in that sense of like going into those spaces. And so being there now, it's really inspiring. Women that came out of South Central and like were able to go to law school and now are practicing it giving back to their own community. I think that's really inspiring for me to like want to do the same. I could have maybe gone to Wall Street coming out of Dartmouth College, and because a lot of my classmates did. But I didn't want to do that. I live at home, which is not ideal sometimes for people that are coming right out of college. They want to have like their house, their car, and all that stuff. But to me, it's really rewarding coming back home and seeing my family there, especially during this time. It's nice having them there, and that also inspires me and pushes me to go to work every day and do the work that I do. And I want to continue doing that in the future with the intersections that follow through with immigration, not only with immigration, but everything else that comes along with that too.
I think I could have gone and done several different types of things. I grew up as an immigrant to parents who worked in low-wage industries, cleaning floors and in restaurants. And we were reliant on public assistance that gave us that safety net so that I could go to college and get a college degree, get a master's degree. So, you know, I could have gone into any of those fields. I think what drew me into this was my first job in any of this was organizing. And I fell in love with organizing. And I realized what I loved about it was that it wasn't going to be me that was going to change anything, but the organizing was allowing me to work with people to recognize their own power. And that's the only way that we're going to make this change. It's not going to be, you know, the 5 of us or 6 of us up here, or just the people at the ACLU. It's the individuals, you know, what we're seeing now happening. This is when real change is going to happen. And so I think for me, that's why I'm in this work and why this is what I'm doing now. I think I'm the director of the Grocery and Retail Project, and the reason why I want to do that in particular is because it's systemic change. I want to see large-scale change. I want to be able to dismantle the structures that keep us oppressed, that exclude people, that dehumanize people. So, you know, that's why I do this, and I think it's really the organizing that keeps me where I am.
This is tough because I do a lot, and it's hard to figure this out. I started as an organizer. I was in DC as an environmental organizer. I didn't really like people, but I like trees. And so I was like, I'm going to become an environmental activist. 3 months after I was in DC was when 9/11 happened, and I was only 21, and the rest of my family was here in LA, and things got wild. And the story that I've been carrying with me all this time doing this work is that my mom called me soon after and was like, you know, something happened, I know you're going to get mad. I was like, Mom, just tell me, what is it? And she said that the FBI had come to our house, and they were trying to get in. They were asking about my cousin, and asking if my cousin was an American-born citizen, which he was born in the same hospital I was. But this is just the way that the FBI tries to get into houses. And this was like 16, 17 years ago. So now we have Know Your Rights trainings, but we didn't have any of that then, especially for the Muslim community. And that's the story that I carry with why I do what I do, is that when that call, my mom said, I'll always feel like a second-class citizen. And to me, that really resonated, because I knew that wasn't fair and that wasn't right. So that's why I started doing electoral organizing, and I started doing voting rights work in the South Asian and Asian American community. The other thing I want to bring up is that we're in a very momentous day today. Today's February 21st. This is the anniversary of the death of Malcolm X, who died in February 21st, 1965. He was a black Muslim. I am Muslim. He is someone I looked up to and look to as I move forward in doing this work. Today is also International Language Day. In 1952, in Bangladesh, what is now known as Bangladesh, it used to be known as East Pakistan. The West Pakistans were trying to oppress East Pakistan by saying that you all need to stop speaking Bangla and speak Urdu. They were trying to oppress through language. And there was revolt in East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, saying that we want to speak our own language. You can't control our language. And to me, these are my roots. This is where I come from. The war is around language, and the war is around the right to have access to words, and the right to my ability to say what I want to say. which is where my struggle is rooted, and I want to keep that in mind as I move forward. And finally, my journey's been kind of all over the place, but where I've kind of landed right now is that that it's really hard to get people excited just to listen to politics. That's really rare. So I like to do this 50-50 thing, where it's like for every time I talk about politics, I like to talk about pop culture, and that's a great way to infuse and get the masses to actually start paying attention to you more. And it's because of that we have our podcast. Our podcast is a very pop podcast. We talk about what's going on in Muslim pop culture, but because we are two Muslim women, it's very political because people aren't used to hearing our voice. And just the fact that we exist is what's political. And so I think that's a lot of the work that I'm doing in the culture side. It's the narratives that I'm a part of, the stories, the books, the podcasts. It's all about recentering narratives, telling narratives, and disrupting what people think should be the box that I'm in.
Sort of working within the Democratic Party, and obviously Trump is a grotesque and an unprecedented threat. But over the last 8 years, under a Democratic president, he continued the surveillance state of Bush and Cheney. He deported more people than Bush and Cheney ever did, and he also asserted a right which Bush and Cheney never did, which is to use drones to extrajudicially assassinate or murder American citizens. So my question is, to what extent do you feel that it is valuable, the panelists feel it's valuable to still work within what's essentially a corporate-controlled Democratic Party, or to what extent do you feel it might be valuable to coalesce into a new one?
So before I let the panelists pick up that question, I do have to, as a disclaimer, say obviously the ACLU is a nonprofit organization, a nonpartisan, non-canon organization, so we're talking about political realities and Democrats and Republicans and so forth in that context, but the ACLU is not a component of, and neither are any of the organizations that the panels represent, of the party. But nevertheless, if folks would like to talk about organizing over the previous administration compared to this administration, I welcome anyone who would like to make those remarks.
I will say that, kind of what I was mentioning before about the minimum wage, it didn't have anything to do with Republican or Democrat. It had to do with talking to people directly about what was going to benefit them. And that's the organizing we've always done, and that's the organizing we'll continue to do. But in terms of, does it make sense, or is there a need to shift the Democratic Party? I think there are many that are already standing up and doing that. We've seen a resurgence of social democrats here in California, lines out the door to vote for delegates. I've never seen that before in my entire life. And within labor, Maria Elena Durazo, who is out of Unite here, is running for vice president of the DNC, or Democratic Party, sorry, not, yeah.
DNC, Vice Chair of the DNC,
yeah.
Correct.
VP of the DNC, because I think there was sense that the folks there really weren't representing working class people. Like you said, it was in some ways very corporate party. But that's on one level. I think the question of like whether there should be a coalescing around another party, I don't know how to answer that one, unfortunately.
I will say that for Asian American voters, I've been doing nonpartisan voter work all these years. The data shows that 35% of Asian American voters are unaffiliated with a political party. That's because neither political party really care to cater to the Asian American voters. And because of that, all of the work that we have to do in the Asian American community can't be party related because they don't care about the party, they care about their issues. And I think that's how we need to organize people. That's a big way to organize how we do people organizing. I do want to touch upon what you were saying about like creating a new party. I mean, yes, but at the same time, like my people are being banned from this country, right? And like my neighbors are getting stabbed. And I think that's like, yeah, that's going to take a while, but in the moment, like I really want to make sure I don't get stabbed when I'm out walking the street just for being brown. And I think that's like a very real reality, and we need to work in the construct of what we have, in addition to destroying the system that we're in. But we need to figure out how to work within the system, because there are some really terrible things that are happening right now.
So, like when I said, the ACLU is a nonpartisan organization, and so we don't endorse one party or another, and we actually try to avoid even discussing party politics. But I will say that one of the reasons that parties exist is because of funding. If we had public financing of campaigns, that would reduce the need for parties, and we could really focus on the issues. And people have a tendency to think that parties are the only way to accomplish any change. It isn't. We need to work on public financing of campaigns, and then parties would be less of an issue.
To sign up to hear these attorneys about volunteer opportunities. So my question is a little administrative,
Sure.
which is, how does one learn about that if they're not emailing the membership?
So, I'm not sure who wants to talk about this more, but so again, if you're on the sign-up sheet tonight, then that will be corrected. I would say, just sort of as a disclaimer, if you will. Historically, we've associated the ACLU with work in the courtroom. We talked about Ahilan and his work. He became a MacArthur Genius Grant recipient because he took on the government, the Obama administration, whose directors of deportation proceedings were making a case that a 4-year-old could represent him or herself in an immigration detention case. And having challenged that at the Supreme Court level is something that the ACLU is famous for, those kinds of big cases. But the ACLU is you as well, and the folks in this room, the volunteers and the interested parties that are trying to plug in and become more involved. And as has been described by this panel, we're in a unique moment where folks are trying to plug in and volunteer in new ways that they haven't previously. It's obviously very important to be a member of the ACLU, but it's much more important to be an active member of the ACLU, so that's something that we're hoping to correct. I don't know if anyone else would like to add, yes?
And if I don't want to dominate you, but you are asking about something that, so what happened was after Donald Trump was elected, the ACLU was just inundated with calls. And this idea to have this thing on Saturday, and my husband and I, are we doing a workshop there on Saturday?
We're doing 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, we're doing 15 minutes. So this idea, it sprung out of a need because we had all of these volunteers and no way to funnel them. Because as Unai said in the beginning, people were kind of dormant and asleep. And the ACLU really has needed volunteers for a long time. But because of November the 8th, that's why you didn't get an email yet, because there's only 2 people working this. But you will get one.
Part of the work that I would like to bring to the board is like, how do we communicate with the membership? One thing a couple things I think you could do is, one, if you go on the website, there's a button there where you could sign up for email blast, and I know that they do have a system. I think it's Nation Builder or something like that. And then the other thing, I follow them on Twitter and on Facebook. They post like a lot of great stuff, a lot of good articles, stories from members, and I see some good videos. So that's how I kind of keep up with it too, because I know like communications department is putting some content out there.
Yes, go ahead, right here.
Yeah, so thank you guys all for the work that you do. Thank you for being here tonight. My question is to do with, I feel like we're kind of in a different place than we've been historically, because I personally have never felt so distant from when I talk to people who are on the other side, versus even just 5-6 years ago. I felt like I at least had some common ground with people then, and now I just feel like I don't even know where they're coming from. So my question is, do you guys have, like Swing Left or websites like that are, I think, really helpful groups that are addressing this problem, but do you have any practical tips for how people who want to help? Because I kind of feel like sometimes in California, these events are just preaching to the choir, like it's not really doing anything to change that, and if we want that major change to happen, then we've got to start reaching the people who just, to me, seem like they're on a different planet, but that's why we have the administration in office that we do right now. So do you guys have any practical tips for how people who want to help or people can reach out to, basically can affect change among, not just our the humans, people that I talk to who don't agree with me, they're not looking at humans of New York. They don't, if alerts are coming out from the ACLU, to them, that automatically discredits it, the fact that it's coming from the ACLU, you know? So what do you guys offer as recommendations for how we can try to address that?
I
a
don't
good
think you're gonna like my answer, but 20% is resistance, right? Only 20% of people voted to get Trump into office. That means that the majority of the country did it. And I think that when you look at the 80%.
The majority didn't vote, a lot of them didn't vote.
Right,
Thought
so
like that. How do
for
we get
me,
them to
I would
vote?
say that's who we talk to, is the people who didn't vote, people who are apathetic, people who are seeing what's happening and like are really regretting that they didn't vote, because those are the swingable people. And I think that we spend so much time focusing on how to talk to the small, middle of nowhere people who all of a sudden have a lot of power, when if we organize all the other 80%, we would have the power back. And I am very adamant about not having to focus our energy on that small 20%.
Getting underneath the surface of who they are. And she did it to try to create an understanding of them. She spent years in Louisiana with them, and she really opened up my understanding of who they are and what their issues are. I think that's very valuable right now to read those books, those kinds of books.
So a lot of that 80% are disenfranchised. They've never been engaged. That's part of the reason why they don't vote, don't, participate. And there's also a large percent of that feel, the reason why they don't participate because they feel powerless. So when you're able to talk to someone, and this is what organizing is, and make them feel like, you know what, if you stand up, you can actually change something, that's when that happens. So to your point, it's very difficult because I have family members who voted for Trump, and I look at them and I wonder, how is this possible? They already have a voice, and they're already voiced their opinion. But I had many other family members who didn't say anything because they're afraid, or they feel like it's not going to change anything. So those are the ones that I'm going to focus on. And, democracy is supposed to be inclusive. And if we really want a democracy, we have to work on bringing that 80%.
So RFK was also the one that said you shine a lantern on your problems. And so let's review some of our problems. We have a Voting Rights Act that's been gutted. We have a series of voter ID laws that have sprung up in the last 2 election cycles, where in the state of Michigan, if you don't have a state-issued voter ID, you can't vote unless you complete an affidavit. In the state of Wisconsin, if you don't have a state-issued voter ID, you cannot vote. So again, we talked about the amendments to the Constitution, the rights of voting, the way that we're engaging folks. To Iha's point, we can be very successful at engaging folks and then fail because of obstacles that have been created, right? These are things that we can fight. Voter ID laws are things that we can fight. They're controlled and dictated at the local level, to the points made by other members of this panel, right? So if we shine a lantern on some of the problems that we have, we can find those folks. And I empathize with the idea that we should have dialogue with the other side, and it is a democratic system, and we have a marketplace of ideas, but I'm also believe in the adage that there are 3 kinds of people in the world. There are saints, there are sinners, and there are salvageables. We are saints. The hardcore opposition are sinners, and they are irredeemable. And then there are salvageables, and the salvageables are the ones that build the majorities. So in terms of organizing, there are people that are never going to be in agreement that women should have had the right to vote. There are going to be people that are never going to be in agreement that we should have ended segregation, right? But some people get to be wrong in American history, and I think we have to be courageous enough to accept that and work on finding our salvageables and organizing them.
Can I just say one
Sure.
thing? To your point, you're never going to fight fake news. 24-hour cycle of it. And that's where I found that what she said is working for me. I'm organized in my little community with my little group, and we work together, and I'm not going to change the mind of the person who's already decided that people like me or people of color are lesser.
But I meant, let me go back. I meant even how do we reach those salvageables?
Sure.
Because I feel like, and maybe I'm being overwhelmed, but I feel like in California, most of us are kind of on this, like, I feel like there's not even that many salvageable stuff, and maybe I'm not seeing a lot of people that, but as a public interest attorney, everyone I see kind of is on the right side already, so I'm asking about, I know those sinners, forget them,
Sure.
there's no way, right? But the salvageables in those other states, what are
Sure.
practical tips for how do we reach them?
So let me add your question, sir, to the mix.
She's going in the right direction now.
Yeah.
I want to refocus a little bit, because jumping off of everything that's been said, here in California, we kind of have 2 million votes too many. You know, based on the way the electoral system is set up and the congressional system, you know, we already persuaded everyone here in California, which is great, and we can do lots of progressive things in the state on the West Coast. But how do we use our resources and our energy to network with groups in places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, Florida, Arizona? You know, I went out to Nevada, you know, and worked because it's next door. You know, knocking on doors, helping to swing that state for Hillary and for the senators there. You know, but what can we do to take our energy and network with organizations in those states? And that's where we need to be doing our persuading.
Do we think that there's more to be done here at home? And what are our lessons that we can export to other states, best practices?
Passing the minimum wage, people think, okay, that's great, everybody's gonna make more money. But the point of the minimum wage, and the only way you pass it, is you organize people to believe it. So when you organize people, those are reaching those salvageables that weren't engaged before. So you've organized them and you've reached the salvageables around a principle that's about, you know, everybody deserves to just live a decent life. And if you're doing good organizing, it's also about you deserve to have a voice in the political process. You deserve to have affordable housing. You deserve affordable health care. You deserve your civil liberties, you know. And so it's a beginning of the conversation that the ideas that kind of come out of here can be used elsewhere. I think, you know, what can you do personally? You know what? The Central Valley is not blue. Have you been there recently? If you want, you can go very closely and see how that goes, right? We still, you know, I think one of the things that's great about California is it's a huge state. And so the way that California goes, the rest of the nation follows. And we've seen it with our clean air program, right? So because we had really strong emissions regulations, a lot of these car companies like, well, California's half of our sales. Why would we create a completely different car for the rest of the nation? And we have to keep pushing on these things. I would also say that. I'm not going to say we should secede. That is not what we should do.
So fun fact, California has more Republicans than any other state elected to the Congress than Texas. We actually have Republicans right in our backyard. So for instance, you worked for Hillary Clinton's campaign. Steve Knight, who represents Santa Clarita, Simi Valley, Palmdale, and Lancaster, is a Republican. Hillary Clinton won that district. The same thing can be said about Dana Rohrabacher, Darrell Issa, Bella Dow. There are a number of folks who represent constituents that voted one way and are having 1:30 a.m. votes to repeal affordable health care. So there's still a lot of work to be done here in California. But
We have Lobby Day, so we have Constitution Day where we go to in the schools, but we also go and lobby our members of our state legislators, our state senators, and our state assembly representatives. And so the ACLU will convene a group of ACLU volunteers, and we'll sit down and we'll talk about our talking points, and then we'll go to the representative's office and lobby the representative and try to get him or her to agree to vote in the way that we think that they should vote on any particular issue. We do these panel sessions, but we do a lot of other stuff, and that's why it's important to come, if you can come, on the 21st, to learn more about the things where you would actually be able to get involved and not just be sitting passively listening to people speak. There's a lot of stuff that we do that's hands-on action.
Fredman wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think again, there's a lot of action you can take online. The ACLU actually on the website has several petitions on different issues that you can sign, spread the word on social media. There's also, like I had mentioned, swing left. So we talk about electoral politics. you know, you can donate to his campaigns. If you join that campaign, they actually assign you a group of voters that you can talk to and make calls on your own time. And all you do is you have to go through a training, right, like on basically on your computer, just use your phone. And then voters are not calling you back because they use a system where if they call back, they go to like a mailbox. There's that. And I think just here at the local level, you know, the ACLU, when I was working at Community Coalition, we were working on the school control funding formula. It's still a fight, and that's about, you know, funding our schools for making sure that predominantly school districts with a high percentage of Black and brown students, English language learners, and students with disabilities get the funding they need. So that's still an inequity in education where you have some districts getting a lot more money from the state, you know, in more affluent districts than LAUSD, for example, or a lot of the other local districts. And that's, I know it's a fight that's still going on here at the local level, trying to make sure that the implementation, so a lot of times we win things, especially propositions like Prop 47, Prop 57, right, the school control funding formula was signed by the governor. And so I think those local fights the ACLU is really involved in, and that you can be a part of.
Thank you for that. Can I get one more question in for the panel?
So everybody knows who Milo Yiannopoulos is. Recently, I mean, the people and the internet took him down. He got shut down because of, I mean, his right to free speech, and hate speech is still free speech. I'm not understanding that correctly. So just want to, I think it helps us to understand, like, helps to inform us as organizers to be agents of change, to see what racism, white supremacy looks like, xenophobia actually looks like, for that to come out for us to be able to address it, have the conversation, and to be able to shut down people like that, right? So just, I guess the question is, like, how do we understand that right and that concept?
That's a very good question. So, so just let me echo your question back to you so folks can hear. So Milo Yiannopoulos, I believe is his name, recently lost his book deal with Simon & Schuster. He also appeared on Real Time with Bill Maher, but that's a whole other side story. But he lost his book deal and was kicked off of Twitter, and a number of things have happened to him because folks in the communities have sort of organized against him using the tools that basically made him famous. He became famous on social media. Folks on social media turned on him. He became a bit of a pariah, and as a pariah, he's now suffering economic and real-world consequences for his hate speech.
The UC Berkeley situation as well.
Right. So, and students have had very active resistance to him coming on campus. Different colleges have had protests of different kinds break out whenever he's been invited to come on as a speaker. And the question is really about understanding free speech rights in the context of, like, again, we're combating hate speech and understanding the real world harms of hate speech. And just, again, interestingly, there's a lot of very interesting Supreme Court cases, for instance, about cross-burning and whether cross-burning is protected speech or not. And those sorts of things, to your point, talk about what it means in that historic context, but then we have a context of the present day. We'd love to hear the panel's thoughts about that.
Well, so his rights to speak freely were not restricted by a government actor. See, the First Amendment protects you from the state taking action. No one came, arrested him, put him in prison, so he can't get on Twitter or Facebook. Well, those are private entities. They have the right to kick anybody off. What the Bill of Rights protects you, it protects you from state actors. So his rights, he still has the freedom to speak. He's not free from the consequences of his speech.
Anyone else have anything to say about that? Going once, going twice. Okay, so I wanted to give the panelists an opportunity to sort of give us like one final thought, final words for the folks here tonight that have stuck it out to the end. Thank you all very much again for coming.
Thank you for the invite and for having me. I'll just say #the resistance.
Come to the next thing at Loyola where you'll be given an opportunity to learn you can do some stuff.
Yeah, thank you again, Nai, and everyone for coming today. And just keep organizing and keeping engaged in whatever issues or all issues that you can.
Like everyone else, thank you. I'm inspired that so many people are really active now, and I hope you will do this as well as many other things. There are a lot of local fights that we need more and more people to stand up for.
Yeah, just to echo everyone, thank you for having me here. I want to emphasize that what resistance looks like today is not going to be like anything we've ever seen before. And that as we move forward, yeah, we can go door knocking, we can go write those letters to the editors, but we need to be really creative in how we resist. And we need to think outside the box, and resistance can be as simple as not going to Nordstrom Rack and buying Ivanka Trump shoes. You know, like what we can do, there's lots of things we can do. And we need, what was that?
Sorry, they're not selling it.
Yeah, yes, they pulled them, so now you can go back to Nordstrom Rack. So that boycott is just one little fraction of all the ways that we can resist. So just be creative. Don't think that you have to just do one thing. Just really think outside of the box. I think my podcast is a form of resistance. And I think listening to podcasts is a form of resistance. You all should listen to my podcast. That's my plug, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. But just be really creative in how you resist, because we need to be thinking outside of the box right now.
Thank you so much. Can I have everyone give the panelists a big round of applause?